Hello, friends. So good to be with you today. We are in 1 Timothy chapter 5. What an incredible study this has been. Paul has been trying to sort out problems. I don't know if you've ever been to church before, but I promise you, problems are going to come up because you have so many people with so many different ideas that are dealing with so many personal problems themselves. Some of them are problems that were heaved on them. Some are problems that come up from within, like pride and manipulation, and that's kind of what Paul was dealing with here in First Timothy. Paul has sent Timothy into the church of Ephesus to straighten out a problem where you've got a couple of people that have been sowing discord. They've been sowing false doctrine. They've caused confusion. There's been rebellion breakup in it. And I'm going to tell you something. When you begin to get that kind of disorder, rebellion is contagious. You find some people that begin to rise up with this rebellious attitude of they don't know what they're talking about. I know what and just kind of sowing discord that breeds, and you'll find it breaking out everywhere. You've got to deal with it in every church, in every situation. Murmuring and complaining isn't something that just is incidental or common. That's something that grows a root, and it's something you have to deal with, or it'll affect your organization, it'll affect your church, it'll affect your family. I've even seen families absolutely split because of allowing that to continue. And so Paul was not going to let that continue. He sent Timothy in there to straighten that mess out. Now he's dealing with a couple of behaviors toward widows concerning leaders or elders that get caught up in failure. And he's dealing with some very difficult problems. I mean, these people they're just out of control. That happens when you don't have leadership, guys. When you don't have leadership, things spin out of control. If maybe things in your church, your organization, if it isn't working, if something is wrong, maybe you need to don't look necessarily at the fruit that's being manifest. You need to look at who's leading this, who's in charge. Are they really called to be a leader in that area? Well, this is what we're going to have to deal with here. And so let me just quickly discuss this first part where he's going to begin to talk about the widows, how to respond to people, the widows, the elders, and even those that were slaves at that time. The important ministry of dealing with the widows, with the women who lost their husband. It was a real problem because the church has a responsibility there. And this important ministry was being taken advantage of by the younger widows, most likely the troublemaking widows from chapter 2 that we talked about. I mean, they would sign up for the church support and spend their days sleeping around, spreading gossip, kind of damaging the church's reputation in the city. And Paul's just having none of it. I mean, he said only older widows who have no family support should qualify. And then he begins to explain that. And so for these churches, they need to show the love and the generosity of Jesus to these people that are going through this season where they have lost their husband. And he puts some ramifications around it, some borders around it. So let's look here at chapter 5 and verse 1. He says, do not rebuke. Now that word rebuke is a strong word. It isn't a matter of exhortation, but rather a rebuke is something that's almost just disrespectful. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him almost like a coach or a trainer would do. Can I just say this to you? That's very important to the Lord. How you treat people says probably as much about you as it does anything else. One of the very first things I see that goes wrong in people's life is when they start to mishandle people. They start to treat them with disrespect. People that are older than you, people that have more experience than you need to begin to show a little bit of respect, even if they're in error. Don't deal with them harshly. Show some respect. And he said, you need to exhort them almost like a coach or a trainer. Come on, we can do better. You are more than this. And he said, you need to treat them like they were your own father, and treat the younger men as brothers. And so then he begins to talk in verse 2. He said, older women as mothers, and treat younger women as sisters with absolute purity. Now, let me preface this. In those days, there was no social government system set up in place to take care of people that were destitute. Many times women, especially at that time, they didn't have their own career. They didn't have their own job. If their husband died, literally, if they didn't have family, they would starve. There was no help for them. And I think that they are probably the most socially vulnerable group. And I'm talking about the elderly widows. So he said in verse 3, he said, give proper recognition. Now, what he's talking about there is financial support. Give proper recognition to those widows who are really in need. And he's talking about those that are destitute. Now, he's going to begin to explain. He said, if a widow has children, grandchildren, they should first to learn to put all of their religious duty into practice by caring for their own family. If they have grandchildren, if they have children, they're the ones that need to be taken care of them. And that's just the way it is. And so repaying their parents and their grandparents. He said, for this is pleasing to God. That's something God pays attention to. I worry about a family that doesn't take care of their own as having the blessings of God on them. I'm just not sure that they do. I mean that. I think it becomes displeasing to the Lord, and it grieves the Holy Spirit when you allow people in your family, and especially those that are destitute, to go without. You're responsible. Don't just shove that responsibility. Well, the government will take care of it. No. First, you're responsible for them. Thank God for a government that does help. I cannot begin to express my appreciation for the United States government and their effort to help the poor. This is the greatest nation in history. The United States of America. Thank God for America because of the programs that they have for the poor and for the needy and for those that can't help themselves. But the responsibility first should fall upon family members. It should fall upon sons and daughters. It should fall upon nephews and even cousins. It needs to be, we take care of our own. And so verse 5 said the widow who is really in need, left alone, puts her hope in God and continues to pray day and night. And they pray and they ask God for help. Now, if they're helped by the church, if it comes to the place that there is no one else to help them, the church should help them. But if they help them, it's not just to help them to go stay at home and watch Netflix. Those that they help, they should be involved in the church. They should serve the church. Prayer becomes their job. It said they should continue night and day and pray and ask God to help. And so even when you help the widows, when the church helps the widows, those widows, that becomes a job. That becomes something that they're engaged in. It's not just a handout, okay? But he said in verse 6, he said the widows who live in pleasure, in other words, she's living for herself, she's dead even while she lives. He said, give these people these instructions so that nobody is open to blame, okay? He said, anyone who does not provide for their relatives and especially for their own household has denied the faith, and they're worse than an unbeliever. Wow. I'm just going to say it again. Verse 8. This is what Paul said. Anyone who does not provide for their own relatives and especially their own household, they've denied the faith, and they're worse than an unbeliever. Wow. That's God's heart right there, and that's the way God sees the situation. We can't afford that, guys. I'm just telling you, somewhere we put so much emphasis many times in youth ministry and children's ministry, but there comes a point where somebody reaches that age where they can't take care of themselves. And somehow in the church, we've got to do a better job of taking care of our elderly people. We've got to do a better job. I feel like the church hasn't done what they've done. They've just kind of shuffled them off into the corner. I feel like we've got a greater responsibility. And you know, that's God's normal way of us dealing with the needy, especially those close to us. I mean, look at it. Jesus, even on the cross, provided for his mother. He said, he said to John, "Behold your mother," and said to his mother, "Behold your son." I mean, on the cross, Jesus is taking care of his mother. That is the heart of God, and I think we've got to do a better job with this. I want to encourage you in your organization, in your church, to make room for those who are destitute. Now, maybe you can help get them government support. I think that's great. Whatever provision that we can get for them, we should. But take the responsibility that you follow up on them and make sure that they're okay. Make sure that they're not left isolated, destitute. I'm almost at a loss for words, if you can believe that, for how God sees that. I think that's disappointing to the Lord. I think that grieves the Holy Spirit. Now, he's also going to deal with widows that were younger, that were not destitute, and he's going to begin to talk about them. He said in verse 9, he said, "No widow may be put on the list of getting help unless she's over 60 years old and has been faithful to her husband and is well known for good deeds, such as bringing up her children, showing hospitality, washing the feet of the Lord's people, helping those in trouble, devoting to all kinds of good deeds." In other words, don't put anybody on the list unless they're of this certain age and that they have a godly character. They have a reputation for these things. Don't support them. Now that falls to the church. Now, why is that important? I think for a couple of reasons. Number one, it keeps the church from falling into error. But number two, it places a responsibility on people to realize if I'm going to be part of the program, that's the only way I'm going to be able to be part of the program. I'm not going to be able to be in this thing and draw from it if I don't make contribution to it. That should be part of our life. There are so many people that are professional takers, but they're not very good givers. The amount of people who come into church, they take. They complain about this, complain about that, but they contribute nothing. They contribute nothing to the overall body. And I appreciate the fact that they tithe or that they give, but there's much more that you have a responsibility to than just that. And so what they're talking about, they're saying you only put widows on there who are connected through service, through godly character, through serving, through helping, through ministering of some age. Make sure that that's the case. And verse 11, he said, "As for those younger widows, don't put them on such a list, for their desires are going to overcome their dedication to Christ, and they're going to go get married." And so he said, verse 12, he said, "Thus they bring judgment on themselves because they've broken their pledge." Verse 13, "Besides, they get in the habit of being idle." In other words, you know, they're drawing from the church, but they're not doing anything. They got anything to do. So what do? He said they go from house to house. Not only do they become idlers, but they become busybodies, and they talk nonsense, and they start saying things that they shouldn't say. You know, they get on social media, and that's all they do. And he's saying, don't take in these younger widows because they're going to have a tendency to do that. So he said, "I counsel the younger widows to marry, to have children, manage their homes, and don't give the enemy an occasion or an opportunity to slander." He said some have already done that, and they've already slipped off into error. They've already done that. So he said, verse 16, "If any woman who is a believer has a widow in her care, she should continue to help them and not let the church be burdened with them, so that the church can help those who are widows who are really in need." Okay? So I want to say that the church has the responsibility of distinguishing those that are really in need, and not just taking on people who just don't want to do anything, don't want to contribute anything. People are going to do, you know this, if you have kids, You know, your kids are only going to do what you demand they do. You can go to the gym. Your body is only going to do what you demand it does. It's painful to go that way, but it's only going to do, and that's life. And as far as people that are around us, we can help some people. I joke with people. I say I don't have a Messiah complex. It's not up to me to save the world. I know my boundaries. I know what I can and what I can't do. But he said there are some people that you're going to have to realize we can help, and some we can't. Some we can really get in and make a difference in their life, and some we can't. So we've got to draw a distinction. And so we're going to have to set the boundaries to where we help people that are this age, that are truly destitute, and also have character in their life. And if they want to be a part of us, they're going to have to fit that criteria. If they're not having character, they're going to have to get some character. They're going to have to start behaving right. If they want to receive, then their behavior is going to have to be thus and thus. But he said, all of those that are younger, don't give to them, because he said they're just going to get caught up in idle talk. They're just going to be going from house to house and talking and playing, and it's going to be a waste, and it shouldn't be on the church. Okay, so that was a really strong word that he was to give concerning those that were widows. I just, if I could just pause there for a second and say, you need to set up, whether it be in your business, your church, even your personal life, you need to keep those that are in that condition of no help. You need to always keep that in mind and have a portion of what you give reserved for them. I believe very much in giving tithe, but I also believe that we should always set aside a portion of what we have to give to the poor. This is really important, guys. You need to tithe. That is your worship to God and thanksgiving for what he's done. That's not even the issue. But apart from that, you need to always, maybe a small percentage, something that you set aside a portion of what you have to give to the poor. And that's something you should teach your children. That's something that your children need to see you do, because that's one of those things that the values are caught more than they're taught. They need to see you caring for them. You know, I'm not for just giving out money to people on the corner, holding up a sign saying help. Sometimes, because I've seen some young men that were out there that I'm thinking, dude, go get a job. I mean, seriously, I'm not going to just throw my money into the hands of a hustler or somebody that's scamming. I'm looking for those that are in legitimate need, because I'm a steward over my money. I'm going to stand in judgment for what I do. But I always want to, I don't want to let that skepticism overwhelm me, because I always want to set aside a portion of what I have to give to the poor. I want to do that. I want with our church, we do our children's offering in our main auditorium every Sunday. And that is our missions giving. And we involve our children in this. We have all of the people give our children $1, $5, $10, and they get in the line and they go through and they put this in this globe. And what we tell them each time is, you're giving to the poor. You're giving to those that are in need. I want it to be said of our children when they ask them, how long have you been giving to the poor? I want them to say, I don't know. I've been doing it my whole life. What a testimony about a person's life. Always set aside a little bit for the poor, because you never know. And sometimes I'll hold on to it for a little while, and I'll get someplace, and then I'll feel unctioned. I'll feel impressed. I'm supposed to give to them. Or I'll see a family in need. There's been times I've stood in the grocery line and I was waiting, and somebody that was in front of me or behind me, I felt impressed to buy their food. You know, and it may be $50, $60, but I felt I had set aside enough that I could do that for them. I felt impressed to do it. And if you don't set money aside what will end up happening is you'll never have it when you feel the unction. If you don't set aside and carry enough, a little bit, then you'll never have it when you get someplace and you see someone need and you feel the unction. So I encourage you to do that. Take care of those that can't help themselves. Take care of those that have the possibility of being destitute. And that is especially found in the widows who have no one to take care of them. We've got to do a better job, okay? Now, let's move forward. This new section, Paul's addressing problems with older men in the church, and he talks about respecting their age, not their misbehavior, but respect their age. And kind of what he was talking about seemed to be alcohol related. I mean, they were damaging the church's reputation in Ephesus. And so Timothy is to, in love, confront them and have them step down from leadership if they were in leadership. So verse 17, he said, the elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor. Worthy of double honor. Now, that is a godly principle right there. It's easier when you're taking care of your own family. But when you have, and this is something that pastors, I believe, are going to have a special crown, because they're not taking care of their own family. My own, I'm just trying to take care of me and my kids. I've got 100 families out there that I'm also taking care of. I'm watching over them. I cry with them when they go through tragedy. I rejoice with them. I dedicate their children. I baptize their children. I'm there to bury their dead. That's honorable. And he said the elders that are directing the affairs of the church, he said they're worthy of double honor, especially those who are doing the preaching and teaching, because what they're doing is they're showing people how to come out of darkness into light, and that's so important. You're not going to be able to go if you're not taught. That's the path to always be open to receiving instruction. Always. You should never get out of school. I want to always learn. I want to always be a student. Always. And so he said that's why the teachers are so important and should be worthy of double honors, because they're bringing people out of darkness or out of whatever. And then he said, verse 18, he said, well, the scripture says, don't muzzle the ox while it's treading out the grain. And the worker deserves his wages. He's worthy of his hire. Okay? Now, he's going to say something here concerning the accusations against leaders. And that's very easy to get into. We're in a time right now, and I don't know if it has to do with social media or what it is, but people say things on social media they would never say to a person's face. It's like they're emboldened, and people are emboldened to complain about this and complain about that. And so Paul makes this statement. He said, verse 19, he said, don't entertain an accusation against an elder. In other words, somebody comes and says something. I'm not taking that unless it is brought about by 2 or 3 witnesses. In other words, it's not just some idle gossip, some fairy tale, and it could be very serious. But he's saying, I don't want you to even entertain that as an accusation unless there are 2 or 3 witnesses that are there to see that. But he said, if you do find one that is sinning and that is in error, he said, those that are sinning, he said, you're to reprove them. Now he said, reprove them before everyone so that others may take the warning. I want to say that this is a little principle that I want you to get in regard to dealing with people that are in error. How public it gets in terms of explanation should depend on how public the offense was. In other words, if that offense did not affect everybody, then there's no need for me to bring it out to everybody. My dealing with it should be within the boundaries of those that were affected by it. Now, somebody say, why is that? Because I'm not interested in airing people's laundry, because I also have a responsibility, according to Galatians 6:1, to restore such a one. He said, you see your brother overtaken in a fault, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. So it's very hard to restore someone that you literally have trashed in front of everybody. It's important that you listen to this one principle, because I've seen people say, well, everybody needs to know. No, everybody doesn't need to know, because that person's ability to give to someone and for someone to receive is almost always connected to their perception of him. And if you destroy that perception of him, then you destroy the opportunity for anyone to receive from him. Restoration should always be our goal. But when it comes to dealing with somebody that is in authority, that sins or does something wrong, I'm just telling you right now, the explanation, who we expose it to, should only be within the boundaries of those who were affected by it. And that's very important. And he said, so that others may heed the warning. I think he's talking about the other elders that are there. So that's important. God doesn't run a gotcha business. He's in the job of restoration. And there's some of you that I'm talking to right now, you got yourself really messed up from time to time, and nobody knew it. And so you be very careful how you deal with others that maybe did get caught in some error, as to how you deal with them. I'm not saying embrace something that's wrong, but you be careful. Here's the deal. I want you to tell my heart, I want God to trust me. I want God to trust me. And I don't want him to feel like I'm just some loose cannon. I don't want to be someone who's looked at as someone who puts out a fire with a hammer. You can get a fire out with a hammer, but it ain't worth anything when you finish. And we've got to be better than that, okay? So he's talking about finding people that are in error, and that's how you deal with them. Now, verse 21, he said, I charge you in the sight of God and Christ Jesus and the elect angels, keep these instructions without partiality, and don't do it out of favoritism. He said here in verse 22, don't be hasty in laying your hands on people, and don't share in the sins of others. Keep yourself pure. In other words, you don't be quick to lay your hands on people as approval or as ordaining them for something. I'm very cautious who I set in. I want to know that things are right in them. I'm not hasty to go lay my hands on them in approval and acknowledgement. And he said, don't share in their sins and keep yourself pure. Now, he made a statement here. He's going to just take a pause, and he's going to talk about Timothy's physical health. He said, stop drinking only water and use a little wine for your stomach's sake and your frequent illnesses. Now, Paul, this has caused a lot of confusion for people. Paul was always acutely aware of Timothy's personal life. And Paul here knows that Timothy is restraining. Obviously, you can see from chapter 2 where he's talking about the drunkards and those that are just completely out of control. And Timothy just simply was probably abstaining from anything but just water. But Paul here says, look, you're having some physical conditions here. Drink a little wine for your stomach's sake, okay? This isn't a violation of 1 Timothy chapter 3. Paul was actually giving some mature, practical advice. He was just saying, look, I understand you're trying to set a good example by encouraging people not to get drunk and drink alcohol, but in this stomach condition you're facing, you need to add a little bit of wine to this thing. See, the water was terrible. And I'm just telling you something. You go any place in the world today where they don't have good purification system set up for their water, you don't drink the water, baby. I'm just telling you something. You'll be on your face for quite some time. The water there was terrible. And with a little bit of wine, though, apparently it was safer than just the water by itself. Now, I want to just say this here. Paul was a man of great faith. Obviously, we saw miracles take place by his hands. But he also spoke of natural healing, which is what he was doing here. These do not contradict each other. I may say, listen, you need to believe God for your restoration. And I also might say to you, I'll tell you what you need to do is you need to get your diet in order. Now, that's not contradicting one another. I believe in God for complete restoration and complete healing, but I almost might say to you, you need to stop eating this stuff and start eating this stuff. Go see a doctor and find out what you're lacking in your body. That's not contradicting the fact that I believe God for healing. I'm a steward over this body, just like you're a steward over your car. You can believe God all you want, but you're going to have to change the oil. And if you don't change the oil, if you don't take care of maintenance of that vehicle, it ain't going to be with you long. And so Paul was just basically giving a kind of a mature fatherly advice, to saying, look, do what you need to do to take care of your physical body. I mean, here's one way that I look at that. I do everything I can, and I believe God to do everything that I can't. I'm going to do everything I can to take care of I'm going to exercise, I'm going to take vitamins, I'm going to eat right, I'm going to do whatever needs to be done. I'm going to try to avoid things that are wrong. And even with that, there are times when I have to deal with it. And so I have to go to God and say, God, I can't fix this. I believe for healing for my body. So that's not a contradiction when he said that to him. So it's just a way of instruction. I hope you'll receive that. Now, let me give you the last two here. He said, the sins of some are obvious, reaching to the place of judgment ahead of them, and the sins of others trail behind them. He said, in the same way, good deeds are obvious, and even those that are not obvious, they can't remain hidden forever. Now listen, when working with other people, when appointing leaders, keep this principle in mind. Don't judge a person always by what you see. Timothy's going to have to look at a lot of people that have had difficulties and fallen into wrongdoing, those that have instigated it, those that have just been victimized by it. And he gave this little piece of advice there. He said, when working with other people, you're appointing leaders, keep this principle and don't judge people by what you see. The sins of some are obvious. They reach the place of judgment ahead of them. Boom, it hits them. And the sins of others trail behind. The same way, good deeds are obvious. Even those that are not obvious, they can't remain hidden forever, because what you do is going to be produced before you sooner or later. Okay? All right, that's a whole mouthful I just gave you there from 1 Timothy chapter 5. And I want you to take some time and meditation on this. We've been basically given a framework of how we deal with people in our family, people in our church, our responsibilities to one another. And I want you to really take this to heart, because this is a very, very important lesson for us. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking a few moments to sit with me. And I think this will be a blessing. If you will please share this with somebody, it would be a blessing. Leave a note. I would love to hear from you. But hearing from you, it's really important to me. Your friendship is important to me. Maybe some of you I've never even met before, but I hope that gets to change. I would love to get better acquainted with you. And so thank you for taking time. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for being my friend. And I'm going to look forward to seeing you in the next chapter. Okay? All right. I'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.